Howdy, everyone. You can find every episode of Why People on Spotify, Apple Podcast, YouTube, or wherever else you get your podcast content. On this Why People episode number 33, we'll talk to Erica Bell, the Senior Vice President and Chief People Officer at Quanterix. Erica has a fascinating background in the life sciences space here in Greater Boston, so we're excited to dive into it. Stay tuned. All right. Welcome, everyone, to the Why People podcast. The Why People podcast, for our new listeners, is a Boston HR Council production. For those folks who don't know, the BHRC is the largest HR and people executive community in the world, with just under 1,500 HR executive council members. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce the co-founder of the Boston HR Council and the co-host of Why People, Paul Roberts.
Thank you, Sean. Good morning, everyone. We are so thrilled for today's guest that we decided to debut our latest BHRC swag item. And for those that are on listening only, it says, go ahead, call HR. So if you'd like one, make sure you join Erica at a future in-person event upcoming year.
Thanks, Paul. And really excited to introduce Erica Bell, Senior Vice President and Chief People Officer at Quanterix. Erica, thank you so much for joining the show today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so we're super excited, Erica. Your background, really speaks for itself as far as some of the most recognizable organizations that have done some amazing things in the life sciences space here in Greater Boston. But we were chatting on the pre-call. You are a listener. You've heard many of the episodes, so we really take a past, present, and future approach. So please help us get started, Erica. Tell us a little bit about your past, help the audience get to know Erica Bell, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you, Sean. Born and bred in Massachusetts, but have traveled extensively around thanks for my, 15 plus years bouncing around at GE. But before that, third child. So I've always looked up to see my older siblings get to be their first to drive, their first to go to college. They were always the first, and I was kind of always the last, being number 3. And, looking back, my family had the endearment term of, well, she's the baby, right? Well, she's the baby of the family, which, at college years, you don't want to hear, right? Now that I'm a mother, you find out that it's an endearment term, but back then it's like, oh, I'm not the baby. I want my first, right? So I worked all through college to use the wonderful tool of tuition reimbursement to help pay for it. Got my first job out of college and went to graduate school at night, right? So I've always done multiple things, worked school, and then finally just kind of got my graduate degree, went off to work and never looked back. But I think that drive that was inadvertently instilled in me at such a young age, being quote unquote the baby, has pushed me to be so determined and I can do that. No, I can do that. It doesn't matter if I'm number 3, I can do that. And that's really pushed me into my career. I think the biggest, most significant time that I spent, as I mentioned, the 15 years with GE was, you got to see and do so many different things. And there was one job that really sticks out to me. It was in the early 2000s where I was the HR leader for, global supply chain. And we had just finished putting some companies together, merging some businesses. It's what GE did at the time. And there was a couple of jobs available in HR. And they said, hey, which one do you want to do? And I said, I want that one. I want the supply chain job. They never expected a female to say, I want supply chain, manufacturing, labs, right? You're on the floor. They never expected it, but I wanted to do it because it was the biggest and it was the most complicated. And I said, if I can do it, if anybody else can do it, I can do it. So if I get my choice, that's the job I want to do. And I did it. And it was, multiple 20-something manufacturing facilities around the world. We had the best team. We still talk to this day, most of us. And, it was really put the foundation of what I learned as a HR professional into play. And it's really made my progression into HR. That was where that led the way to where I am today.
Well, what an awesome kind of start to the conversation, Erica. And I had to give a shout out to a past guest, Sam Howland at Gannett. She's a big she actually sent me the book, the birth order book. She's a big birth order,
Yes.
and kind of talks about, right, how that plays a role in a lot of things. So it's cool that you shared that with us, which kind of gave you kind of your perception on what you weren't going to be limited to. I think that's really, really cool. And Erica, we'll definitely dive into the GE part of your career shortly, because I mean, what a fascinating place that place is, and I can imagine what it was
Mhm.
back in what you were talking about. But help us understand a little bit. Our listeners are always interested in the start in HR even before the career started. So how did you find out about HR? Was it a first job? Did you study something that really kind of turned you onto it? Like what got Erica Bell into the HR kind of realm?
Yeah, it's a funny story actually. And I am actually a sociology major, so I did sociology and communications, but the appeal to social work at the time wasn't there. So a very dear friend of mine who I work with today, who is still one of my closest, dearest friends, and I met in college in our undergraduate. And I remember we were sitting on campus and we were both graduating with sociology degrees, and we're like, well, what should we do with this if we don't want it to be a social worker? And he said, well, I hear this thing about HR. I'm going to go do that. And I think I'll be really good at it. And I'm like, that sounds good. I think I'll do that too. And so off I went and he went, and we both started our careers and stumbled into HR having sociology degrees.
Wow.
With no plan, Sean. There was no plan. It was more like, oh, I'll do that too. Sounds good.
Well, I mean, you've listened to a lot of the episodes. I mean, it's very rare that folks come up through studying, actual HR, or if you go far enough back, personnel.
Yeah.
It always seems to be a pivot. But I think it's really cool that you and this close friend said, "Hey, what can we do with these degrees? Since we're not super excited right now to get into social work." And I can tell in your voice, it's not a knock on social work. It's just personally, this is how we're feeling. That's really, really neat. And I'm excited. Hopefully you share this podcast episode with that dear friend that got you into that lane.
Yes, yes, we talk about it often. We do. And it's, it's not a knock on social work at all. That's a very hard profession, but I've always wanted to be in business, right? And with the communications degree, it's like, how can we use this in more of a a business setting? So that's how we stumbled into it.
All right, so you make this decision. Do you jump in the classifieds? Do you start looking for HR gigs? Like what's that bridge look like?
Yeah, I just started looking for HR, generalist, specialist, entry level jobs. I, bumped into someone that I had worked with previously, and she's like, "Oh, I'm at this small company. We're actually looking for a, new HR person. Would you be interested?" And I said, "Sure, sign me up. Let me talk to whoever I need to talk to." So I went in and I interviewed, and that was the beginning of the end, so to speak. It's all in who you know. I tell my kids that all the time. It's all in who you know. Use your network.
And so, Erica, maybe I apologize. I skipped forward before asking this question. Give us a little bit of a sense of what you did or didn't know about human resources at the time that your friend says, "Hey, I'm gonna go, give a go in this HR space." Do maybe did you know much about HR as a corporate function? Did you know where it sat and how it helped drive business? Like, give me a little sense of what you knew at that point.
Well, to your point, right, we're talking 1996, so 28 years ago, and it was just coming out of personnel, right? So some companies had personnel, some, more forward-thinking companies were merging into this HR space, and we knew, and I knew, it was more focused around the people side of it, which is where the sociology comes in and the communication comes in. But to the aspects of what it is today, of where it was then, and the transformation that, those of us that got into the field at that time went through, I had no idea, right? You just didn't know how the boom that was coming in the late, 1980, 1990s, early 2000s.
That's really neat. And so it's great to hear. And I'm gonna take a clip from this, and I do an event every year at my undergrad, Nichols College, Worcester, Mass, called Work the Room. And and we name it that because kind of on purpose because no one actually likes to work the room. That can be a little ominous, right? But the power of networking, the power of your network. It's neat to hear you say that you knew someone that worked for a company, a small company that was looking for someone to lead HR. So you go through that process, Erica. You land that position. Help us understand once you start actually doing the work. When did you say, "Hey, this is something that I really enjoy and something that I really want to make a career out of long term"? Was that in that first role? Did it come a little bit later?
It came a little bit later. I would say, my second job, it was a company it was a private company, engineering company, R&D company, and the owners were looking to retire. The family didn't wanna take it over, so they were looking to sell it. And, GE happened to be the company that was acquiring the business, down the street from Billerica where I work today and in Waltham, Mass. And that was when going through integration and being acquired, right, really sparked my, "Hey, this is beyond payroll, and this is beyond, making sure people are onboarded correctly. This is really now getting into," and again, you're talking early 2000s, I think it was, 2002 when we were acquired by GE, and workplace experience didn't exist back then, right? It didn't have a term. So it was about how do you bring these people into this company, making them feel like they belong here, while pretty much taking all the values that you learned as a privately owned company and saying, okay, forget those values and adopt ours, in making them feel like that they wanna do it, they belong there, and they need to be there, and that's really was like, "Yeah, I can do the onboarding, that's good stuff, but this is really the heart and soul of HR. This is really of, employee experience before it was an employee experience."
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's neat to hear you say that, Erica. And now I promised the audience that we would get up to the GE.
Here we are.
And shoot, you could at some point we'll throw all of the transcripts of our past podcasts into some type of fancy AI machine that will help us create some word clouds, some commonalities. But GE has come up quite a few times, folks that have passed there. In I mean, just as someone who grew up in Greater Boston, shoot, I think of my two graduate degrees. I think maybe I've done 5 or 6 case studies on GE itself, some part of the business or some um, transformation, something along the line. So tell us a little bit, Erica, about really what you learned at GE in a pretty significant point in your career, relative to leadership, HR, all the fun stuff.
Yeah, I mean, look, you can't beat the GE experience, right? Especially back at that time, right? They had HR leadership programs, they had finance leadership programs that are just world class. I didn't go through any of them, but that's besides the point. They did learning and training with GE was the best of the best of the best, right? You didn't get any better training than the training that was provided at GE. They also, because of their size, you could bounce around there your whole career if you wanted to, right? I chose not to, for personal reasons, but, I spent a good, like I said, 15 years there. That's a great story for anyone, regardless of what role you sat in, right? I was lucky enough to see different parts of GE. We were acquired into the energy business. I spent some time there. We went over to an infrastructure sensing business, and then I finally settled into the healthcare side and never looked back. But I think why GE comes up with a lot of people is because it's experience you wouldn't get anywhere else. I helped open a facility in China, right? Who gets to say that in HR? It's this environment that you don't have to ask in HR to have a seat at the table. It's automatically assumed you have the seat at the table, regardless of what level that you're at. Any level that supports a client in an HR business partner role, that assumption that the culture that GE has brought has always had HR at the table, like I said, at every level.
And Erica, it's interesting. You share a trait that many of our past guests share, and I could tell you're a very modest person. Tell us a little bit about being somewhere like GE that is high performing for 15 years. and getting to do all of these different things. Help us help the audience understand what raising your hand look like, and how did these opportunities, how did you find yourself in them? Was it kind of, leading by example? Was it raising your hand when no one else would? Like help us understand how you got these different opportunities to do these different things.
You said it yourself, GE is a high performing culture. You had to perform to be able to get the opportunities. That's the bottom line. Whether it be raising your hand for something or simply just knowing who is in that network that can help you. You don't know all the jobs that are available in GE, right? There's just so many, right? And I remember being at this one company. I changed a couple names. It was the same company I was with when I was acquired, and I wanted kind of that next step. And they're like, you can do the next step, do it in another business. You have to see something else. And that really opened my eyes to like, oh, right. Like there's this whole other country of GE that I'm just sitting in a small corner of it. So that's when I started to branch out and I said, hey, this job looks interesting. And I think that is the thing that in a normal, regular sized business, like I could never do this at Quanterix where I am today. Like, hey, there's a job over here. I want you to go apply for this. We're not big enough. Like I can't provide those opportunities, but GE could. Right. So it was, hey, love ya and you're doing great. But if you really want to get to that next level, you got to go see something else. And I'm willing to let you go to do that because I can find someone else to come in. But hey, really start to look within GE to find that next role. And I think that's something that we don't take enough for granted for. You know what I'm saying?
I do know what you're saying, Eric, and I appreciate you sharing that because, Paul and I have been really lucky, fortunate over the last 5+ years to get to know a lot of folks, a lot of your peers, a lot of folks in the HR executive space. And a question that gets asked a lot is, there's a lot of folks kind of what I would say in the director level or maybe in the VP level who want to take the next step, but feel a little bit like they're stuck, right?
Yes.
And what you just said, Erica, I think is really powerful in the sense that you need to be willing to step out of what you're doing right now that's comfortable and find yourself somewhere that you can push yourself the way that you want to from a growth perspective. And
Mhm.
sometimes that's not always in the organization you're in right now.
Correct.
Quite often it's not because of what you just shared about your own company, Quanterix, right? We're not big enough to afford that opportunity, right? So I think that's kind of a rubber hits the road point for a lot of people when they feel like, geez, I would really love to get to the next step. Being almost self-aware enough with where you're at, saying maybe it's not here, and then now having the kind of cost benefit discussion with yourself of, okay, where is it? So I thought you did a really unbelievable job in kind of encapsulating that with your time at GE.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we spend so much talking about retention that we'd rather have people in our organization that are, living the day to day, not to their fullest potential, whether it be because they're bored or we don't have the runway that they need, than having the courage to say, go find what you need and we'll help you do that. Right. I don't think there's enough conversation around that because you don't want your people to leave. Right. And I don't want my people to leave. But at the same time, I want them to have the same opportunity I was afforded to and be able to work to their fullest potential.
Amen. And something about timing and pacing too. I just, whenever we're chatting about things and I'm not super familiar in your, the HR executive world, but I think about my own career, right? I mean, shoot, there, certain times of my career, I'm thinking back, early 30s and in my late 20s. I mean, you could have given me anything, and I would have ran with it, and and when do we start, and can we start tomorrow type thing. Now, I have 3 little kids, 6, 4, and 4. Kind of, built a home here, and it would be a little bit longer of a discussion of like, okay, well, what's the timing? What's the travel look like? All of those different things. And I think that's important as folks go through that kind of process of spacing and pacing of what makes sense for you professionally and how do you make sure it makes sense for you personally as well?
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. And that, turned out why I ended up leaving GE. Not that I didn't love the company. I still love the company, right? Even in its, how it's set up today. But the reality is, GE, I made it 15 years without having to relocate. I traveled a ton and I got to see great things and meet amazing people, but I never had to relocate until it was time to say, all right, Erica, either you're going to relocate or just be comfortable knowing this is where you're going to be. And I wasn't comfortable with that. I'm like, you know what? I can still do more. I'm not, but I can do. I live in Boston, for God's sakes. I can do more anywhere, right? So, you have that pedigree on your resume, and you can go and do other things, and that's ultimately what made me, lead to the next, journey of, okay, now let me go do something else under a different, roof, and not, to your point, disrupt the family.
All right. Well, thanks for kind of setting the stage for us, Erica. Let me stop you there. And so we're gonna do a little kind of reverse engineering here. So, like we said on the intro, you're SVP, Chief People Officer at Quanterix, but kind of going chronologically in our conversation now, you've come to what's going to be kind of the end of your time at GE, right? At what point during this whole process, this whole career journey so far, had you ever said, "Wait a minute, I think I'd really like to lead this whole function someday. I think I could do it." Or I don't know, maybe did you ever say, "I don't want to do it"? Like,
Anytime.
so help us
Many times.
help us through that thought process on your end, Erica. Help us situate it, timeline wise.
Yeah, I think it really came, it crossed my mind at different stages throughout your career, right? Like, what's next? How do you keep relevant? How do you stay engaged? How do you keep challenging yourself, right? And there's so many things. I'd done the business partner thing for so long, right? I knew it. I love it. It's great. It challenges you to learn everything except the specialties, right? You're not a center of excellence for anything. And that was really what had to tie everything together. So understanding the, the total reward side, really understanding the, recruitment and the compliance around the recruitment, right? And the systems, the operations behind HR, and really what allows the business partners to do the great things that the business partners do. And it's those centers of excellence, right? So that was when I started to dip my toe in it, I was like, wow, I really like this. And then you can see how everything is connected and how everything's interchangeable. You can't do, and I tell my team this a lot, of people that have worked for me, how do I get to where you are? And I say, you have to do a little bit of everything. You have to be versatile. You have to touch a lot to be able to, when you get to the seat, you have to make so many different decisions. And some of those decisions have to be quick decisions. You got to know how a business is run, right? You've got to know your business and you got to know how everything works. So when it is time to make those tough decisions, you know how they're all interconnected.
Yeah, it's neat hearing you talk about the business partner to center of excellence bridge, because we hear that a lot, and it's neat to hear it from your perspective based on your career at that point. So it's a perfect kind of segue to what I would call, Erica, kind of your ascension into kind of the executive, part of your career. Tell us a little bit about dipping your toe into the COE pieces, and then kind of walk us through as you start to think about the VP roles and into the CHRO, Chief People Officer seat.
Yeah, I think, those came really quick, really fast. It's like a blur to me. It was over the last, I don't know, 6, 7, 10 years. Because you always touch it in some way, but then having to lead it is a whole different thing. And it does give you a taste of understanding why things work the way they work. And again, there's a lot of compliance in what we do and understanding that. I think, I was, doing a little bit of a bridge of, hey, I'm still doing the business partner role, but I also have HR operations, HRIS underneath me. And what does that mean? And how does that all work together? But understanding how your business or your clients work and applying that to the operational side was the piece that really got me excited. That was the piece that I said, hey, if I can do this, this is going to help the business run better. This is going to help our employees perform better. This is how, if we do X for our employee management, and performance evaluations, and how does we make it meaningful, that's only going to make the business run better, right? And that's one small example. Then you bridge it out to, hey, what does employer branding look like? I talk a lot today to our head of talent acquisition at Quanterix about employer brand. She gets super excited about it. I get super excited about it. Like, what is our employer brand so that candidates can come and be excited about Quanterix and want to say, hey, I want to go work for that company. And building those things out previously has really given you the story behind how do you do it somewhere else and how do you do it when you're sitting in that seat.
Yeah, that's really neat, the employer brand conversation, Erica. I just wanna, pause and go back a second. You said something that kinda really hit home, with all the conversations we've had here today. You know, you talked about kinda really digging in to the operations, and the systems and saying, "Geez, before I knew it, I kinda looked up and I said, well, wait a minute, all my experience here, I actually know how to tie this to the business and drive business results," right? That's another common theme with your peers, is this kind of this business curiosity on how can I take my world, right, my function, and tie it to business outcomes, right,
Yes.
have it drive business outcomes and not be so separate in not only in actual functionality, but just how people perceive HR and people. And I really liked how you talked about kind of, innately, how you've been able to do that. Has that always been in you? Have you always been a curious business person, or did you have to sharpen that bone a little bit as you've progressed in your HR career?
We always, and I'll step back to G for a minute. There was always this piece of business acumen, and we talked a lot about having the business acumen. And if you had business acumen, you had a piece of something that not everybody could have, and that really stuck with me. Of what is your business acumen and understanding the business so that you can help make decisions, be a better company, help them grow, right? So I that curiosity has always been there. Now, depending on what company I was at, what seat I sat in, really depended on how much I had to sharpen that bone, to your point, right? My first VP role, I probably had to sharpen it a little bit more. My first chief people officer wasn't too bad. I got the grasp of it, and I wasn't as much. But I think, depending on the seat and the experience that you build over time really dictates that. But the business acumen, the curiosity was always there.
Well, that's really cool, and like, kudos to you because just in thinking about even the teams that you've led in your last 3 spots, and I don't mean this pejoratively to the consumer goods world, but it's not like you're making toasters, like, you're involved in some, pretty amazing science. How does a sociology communications undergrad, how do you go through, this idea of learning the business where you are today doing some of the most fascinating research and science on the globe? Like, tell us a little bit about that, Erica, how you get yourself up to speed, I guess, with that work.
Yeah, you learn the business, right? So, I was probably at Quanterix maybe, a couple months, and, our, general counsel had just started, maybe 6 weeks after me. So we did a lab tour together, and whenever I was at a site when I was traveling, I always toured the facility. That means manufacturing lines. That means, through the offices, I always did a facility tour. I always talked to people. What do you like? What are you doing? How does this work? That curiosity is there. When my team came and, obviously I came into Quanterix at a very interesting time. The CEO had been in place maybe 8, 9 months, and there was a certain amount of change that was going through the organization. So as my team developed, I would, and every time I hired someone new, I'm like, I want you to do a lab tour, get in the labs, understand what they're doing, talk to the people, right? And I think that's what helps you understand. You're not just sitting behind the desk saying, okay, here's an employee relations problem. This is how I handle it, right? It's more about what does it mean to the business, because you can't help a business grow if you don't know what we do. That's what I go back to.
I love that, a lab tour. I think everyone should do
Oh,
tours, right? No matter what kind
yes. Gown up, get in there, see it, ask questions. Yes, yes.
imagining Paul in a lab gown right now, and I could, yeah, keep going well. Well, all right, Erica. So you've really done a great job walking us through this kind of career journey. The last question before we kind of jump into the future and kind of how you're thinking about the future and maybe some advice for folks is, can you tell us a little bit about the transition from the vice president seat into your first chief people officer role? And, did you feel ready? Was there anything that you said that you thought to yourself when you looked across the full spectrum of HR and people that maybe you were, weaker on, and that you knew that you were going to need support, from a team? Like, tell us a little bit about that transition and how you prepared yourself for it.
I was very fortunate. My first chief people officer role was with a company called Biko. It is a Swedish company. At the time that I joined, the leadership team was in place. The CEO was just, so eager, and he was a founder. Chief technology officer was also a founder. CFO was a founder. So it was a nice group of entrepreneurs that were like, "Hey, we know we need this role and we like what you have to offer. Let's partner up and see what we can do." So having that leadership and the founders with you on the journey has really gave me the opportunity to test things. Hey, this is what I've seen. Let's try it. Hey, you know what? Biko is a biotech company. They had 14 subsidiary companies underneath their parent company of Biko. These three founders built the company themselves from the ground up. So you admire that coming in, right? And they know more about this company than anyone, right? So the trust that they instilled in me to say, "Hey, come work with us and build out this, HR function. And, let's try something here. Does this stick? Maybe not, And again, it's also a global company. I sit in Boston. They're a Swedish company, or I spent 3 weeks on the road in Europe, just meeting people, going to all these different companies and understanding what do you need as a company, because you're a subsidiary, you're not part of, you have your own culture, you have your own identity. And then being able to say, "Hey, this is going to work here. This is going to work there. All right, we need to, everybody has to cut costs at some point. What if we become a service, and let's, if you want this training, pay for it," right? Like any other, like, set money aside in the budget and pay for it. Oh, that's a good idea. Let's think about that. And some people bought into it. Some people like, "Hey, I'll do this next year or the coming year." So you really got to build it almost from the ground up with these amazing founders, right? So it was really kind of the ultimate setting. Hey, my first CPO job, you guys are putting the trust in me. Let's do this together. And we did do it together. It was, I wouldn't have asked for a better company to go through too for my first CPO role.
Yeah, that's neat, Erica, and it sounds great, right? It kind of affords you the opportunity to, quote unquote, I don't want to say learn the job, but kind of build the job your way, and
Yes.
in your persona, with a bunch of great leaders that maybe don't necessarily have a ton of experience with that function under them, right? And so we've heard it on this podcast go the other way around. If you're a very long tenured CHRO or chief people officer and end up at a founder-led, right, organization like that, and you have all of this background of how you've done things forever and kind of what your style is, how that could be somewhat tough because now you're working with folks that really have never had that under them before, and we've seen it be, I don't want to say friction, but sometimes it's not the right fit. It's neat to hear in your spot how you that's how you started, so it almost allowed you the opportunity to learn with them. I think that's really cool. I liked how you explained it to us.
Yeah, it was fun. It was fun.
Well, all right. So this has been amazing, Erica. I knew maybe about 20% of all this cool stuff. So it's neat to learn about you. In the last, kind of 5 or 10 minutes here, we love to kind of take a look to the future. First question: how are you thinking about this work moving into the future? What's top of mind? What do you think about relative to the work that you're leading moving into the next 12, 24, 36?
Yeah, I think we're at an interesting time. I've been able to, like many others, see the evolution from personnel to HR and now beyond, right? We were part of that transformation. We talk about things today that we didn't talk about, 15 years ago. DE&I, for example, right? We talked a little bit about workplace experience. Now we're in this post-COVID world, which is now several years behind us, thank goodness. But we've mastered the hybrid environment, right? And not going into the office 5 days a week. And I keep on saying, like, making sure our culture is commute worthy, right? Making sure that when they do come into the office, whether it be 1, 3, 4, 5 days a week, we built a culture that they want to be there, they want to stay there, they want to, continue to build their career there. I think as HR professionals today, we're continuing to look at upskilling and reskilling our talent. And that goes within our talent world of, where do we have to upskill? Where do we have, more mature employees that we might need to reskill based on certain things that are coming in? Where I think we're going, and you've actually hosted some podcasts on this topic, is AI. And I know AI this tends to be a lot of buzzwords around it, and we use that topic a lot, but we haven't fully seen it going into being fully implemented into business, and certainly not from an HR perspective. So I think that's kind of is what's on the horizon. It's an exciting place to be. We commonly talk about digital HR and AI, and it's often interchangeably, but they're also very, very, very different. Where your digital HR is, more technology driven to help you make business decisions. It's metrics. How do you grow your workforce? When we talk about AI, it's, how do you transform something? How do you transform processes? How do you transform communications, things like that? And I think it is set to revolutionize HR specialties, process management, recruitment, the employee experience. So I think that's on our horizon. And we need to continue to talk about that to see where that takes us.
Yeah, that's exciting, Erica, and geez, I'm always on the lookout for cool little sound bites to help us with the marketing of this podcast, and that culture should be commute worthy. I mean, gee, that's ready. That's a good one. That's the first time I've heard that, and this RTO conversation. It's never really stopped since COVID. It goes kind of up and down a little as
Yes.
far as how much we're talking about it. But a culture that's commute worthy. That's I mean, shoot, I think you could probably put that on a frame and throw it up in an office.
Maybe I will. Maybe I will. I mean, aside from today, usually I'm in the office 5 days a week. I mentioned to you at the beginning, I'm out of the office today, sitting here in the Smoky Mountains. But when I am in the office, I am in 5 days a week, right? And making sure that we build a culture around that, so that when we do have our hybrid employees in, it is something that they want to be at. It's commute worthy, right? You want to be there, you want to be around it. I think the other thing is focusing on our remote employees, right? And making sure that our remote employees feel just as connected to your company as they would if they were there every day, right? We can't help that. We have people across the country. We love that about our organizations, but at the same time, how do you make sure that they still feel connected to the core of the company sitting across the country or whatever state that they sit in?
That's great, Erica. Thanks for sharing, and I know that's something that a lot of folks are thinking about. Last question before we let you get back to the Smoky Mountains, and really, we'll be super interested in your answer here, just because you kind of gave us a little bit of your answer in your career journey itself. But Paul and I we've been really lucky with the BHRC team to do these podcasts and to run events and to really get to know a lot of your peers in kind of unintended consequences. We get a lot of fan mail, sounds a little weird, but we get a lot of notes from folks kind of in the greater business community saying, I'm not in HR people, but I think maybe I'd like to. Like, what's a great first step for me, or keep that person that is in the early stages of their HR and people career, and they're looking to start advancing their career. What's some advice you can give to early stage professionals on how to get going and how to advance themselves in a Erica Bell kind of way?
Do everything. Just do everything. Get as much exposure and experience to all the parts of HR as you can. The more versatile you are, the more options you have, right? If you're a business partner, you can go, like I said, you can go business partner, you can go center of excellence, you can do all these different things. I always tell people just, if you're not in a specialty, start as a business partner, generalist, specialist, coordinator, and then find what you love as part of that, because you touch everything. You touch recruitment, you You understand total rewards to a certain extent, right? You understand training and the importance of it, and then find out what you love. Find out where you gravitate to, what is part of your, core of how you want to grow your career. And then that'll give you the options, right? Hey, I really like total rewards. I really like benefits. I'm going to go do that for, and see how that turns out. I think that is, do a little bit of everything. And then you can narrow down how you want to use that experience.
That's great. I love kind of the advice too on how to get started and then start to gravitate towards what you find yourself most interested, curious, and passionate about. That's awesome. Erica, this has been just a ton of fun. We're glad that we got to have you on as a guest. It was really fun learning more about you, and we're just super thankful that your willingness to come on.
No, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, we'll hope to see you soon. All right.
Definitely.
Thanks, Erica.